What is the creepiest unexplained anomaly on Earth? Story 1. Yeah, both of these fall into the category of nature quietly reminding you that you don't understand it. Devil's Hole is genuinely unsettling. It's a deep underground water-filled cavern in Death Valley that reacts to earthquakes from thousands of miles away. Not nearby quakes, stuff in Alaska, Japan, Chile. The water level starts sloshing around minutes later like it got the memo. No visible connection. No obvious pathway, just a hidden aquifer responding to tectonic events across the planet, which means there are massive invisible structures under our feet we only glimpse when the Earth twitches. It feels less like geology and more like the planet having nerves. Then there's the Strid, which is basically a horror story pretending to be a creek. It looks narrow, calm, and almost cute. You could jump across it. People have, and vanished. The water funnels into a deep, eroded chasm beneath the rocks, with violent currents that pull anything down and keep it there. No bodies, no resurfacing. Just gone. The river is wider underneath than it is on top, which your brain absolutely does not expect. Both are creepy in the same way. They look benign until you understand what's actually happening out of sight. Earth is full of stuff like that. Quiet, patient systems that don't care if you're aware of them or not. Nothing supernatural. Still deeply unsettling. Story 2. Devil's Kettle Falls is one of those places that feels like the map forgot to finish rendering. You've got a perfectly normal river, the Brule, flowing along like rivers do, and then at the falls it literally splits in half. One side keeps going downstream. The other side just vanishes into a hole in the rock. No visible exit. No bubbling downstream. Nothing obvious. People have been throwing stuff into that hole for decades. Dye, ping pong balls, GPS trackers, logs. Most of it never shows up anywhere. Not downstream, not nearby, not resurfacing later. It's not even consistent enough to say, oh, it definitely rejoins the river a mile away. Sometimes something appears far downstream, sometimes absolutely nothing does. Geologists think it probably feeds into deep fractures in the basalt and rejoins groundwater systems or the river later on, but the key word is think. No one's been able to trace it cleanly. The plumbing is hidden, complex, and apparently very good at keeping secret. What makes it creepy isn't that it's supernatural, it's that it's mundane nature doing something that feels impossible. A river just disappearing. Half of it, casually, in broad daylight. It's a reminder that we mapped the land doesn't mean we understand what's underneath it. Story 3. The so-called center of the universe in downtown Tulsa is literally just a small concrete circle inside a bigger brick circle. If you're expecting cosmic energy or alien tech, you're gonna be disappointed immediately. It looks like nothing. That's kind of the trick. The point isn't to look at it, it's to stand in it and talk. When you're dead center and make a sound, clap, speak, shout, it echoes back at you way louder than it should, like you're wearing invisible headphones. People standing just a few feet outside the circle don't hear it the same way at all. To them, you sound normal. To you, it's booming. No official explanation ever fully nailed it down. Something about surrounding walls, the bridge, the circular geometry, sound waves reflecting back in just the wrong/right way. It's probably physics, but it feels like a glitch, and that's why people like it. No plaque, no definitive answer, no big reveal. Just a spot where reality behaves slightly differently if you stand in the right place, not the center of the universe. Just a reminder that sometimes the universe messes with you for fun. Story 4. There have been a few recorded ultra-low frequency sounds picked up by underwater microphones near Canada that don't have a clean, satisfying explanation. They're not ship noise, not earthquakes in the usual sense, not whales anyone can confidently ID. The best guesses tend to be ice-related. Huge ice masses cracking, grinding, or collapsing in ways that produce sounds that travel insane distances underwater. But best guess isn't the same as we know, and the ocean is extremely good at hiding sources. Sound travels weirdly down there, bends, reflects, and shows up far from where it started. So you end up with these audio ghosts that feel ominous even if they're probably just geology doing something violent out of sight. And then yeah, you zoom out to space and life and it all gets worse in a different way. How did we end up here? A universe that shouldn't care, particles that shouldn't organize, chemistry that somehow bootstrapped itself into cells, cells into minds, minds into people who stare at the stars and freak out about it. Every step feels absurdly unlikely on its own, and yet here we are, asking questions instead of being a soup of molecules. The unsettling part isn't that we don't have answers, it's that the answers we do have don't make it feel any less weird. The ocean reminds us how much is hidden right below us. Space reminds us how little reason there is that anything is happening at all. Both quietly say the same thing. We understand way less than we pretend to, and somehow we're still here anyway. Story 5. I want to add the sailing stones. They aren't a mystery anymore, but are a perfect example to show that most mysteries have a logical explanation. We just haven't found it. They are small boulders that move by themselves. They are too heavy to be moved by the wind, they leave a clear track of their trajectory, and there aren't any footprints or evidence of someone doing it. What is moving them? The sailing stone happens in an arid desert close to a mountain that gets snow in winter. During spring, the snows melt and the water reaches the desert. This water is not a giant wave. It is just a few inches of water that slowly crosses the desert. The small current slowly moves the stone, but is not strong enough to delete the heavy track. There's even a video of it somewhere. Story 6. They're semi-explained in the sense that we're pretty sure what they're for. Shortwave radio broadcasts, usually reading strings of numbers or coded phrases, almost certainly for espionage. One-way communication to field agents. No interaction. No confirmation. Just a voice repeating numbers into the void. If you know the cipher, it means everything. If you don't, it's nonsense forever. What gets people isn't the spy part. It's the vibe. A calm, emotionless voice. Often a child or synthetic tone. Broadcasting at regular intervals. Sometimes for decades. No station ID. No explanation. You can stumble across one by accident while tuning a radio, which feels like overhearing something you were never meant to hear. And then there's the fact that some of them just stop, or change, or resume years later. Governments don't acknowledge them, but they also don't deny them very hard. They exist in this weird limbo where everyone knows they're real, nobody officially claims them, and they don't need modern infrastructure to keep running. Even in an age of satellites, encryption, in the internet, there's something deeply unsettling about a ghostly voice counting into the static, knowing that somewhere, maybe one person on Earth is listening very carefully. It's not supernatural, but it feels like a message leaking through a crack in the world. Story 7. Wow. Signal was a received radio signal picked up here on Earth in 1977, coming from a specific point in deep space. It wasn't noise, it wasn't random interference, and it wasn't something bouncing around locally. It had the exact characteristics scientists were hoping to see from a non-natural source. A narrowband signal, the right frequency, the right duration, and a strength curve that matched Earth rotating past a fixed point in space. And then, nothing. Never repeated, never confirmed, never explained. That's what makes it creepy. If it were repeatable, we'd probably have figured it out by now. If it were clearly natural, it would have been filed away. Instead, it sits in this awful middle ground, strong enough to be interesting, singular enough to be useless. The signal didn't say anything. No pattern we could decode, no message, just something was there once, which is honestly more unsettling than a clear hello. It's like someone keyed a mic, realized it was live, and never spoke again. So yes, it counts. Not as proof of aliens, but as proof that the universe can occasionally do something just strange enough to permanently live rent-free in our heads. One unexplained signal doesn't mean we're not alone, but it's enough to make silence feel louder. Story 8. People have been recording them all over the world for years now. Deep metallic screeches, horns, grinding noises that seem to come from the sky itself. They don't sound like planes, thunder, or anything familiar, and they often happen with clear skies, which makes them extra unsettling. The videos always look the same too. Someone filming the clouds while this industrial apocalyptic noise rolls overhead. The semi-boring explanation is that most of these sounds are probably ground-level sources behaving weirdly. Wind moving through buildings, metal structures expanding or contracting with temperature changes, construction noise traveling through atmospheric layers, or distant trains and machinery getting bent by temperature inversions. Sound can travel really far and in very non-intuitive ways when conditions are right, especially in cities. But here's why people don't fully buy that. The sounds often seem too loud, too directional, and too consistent across totally different locations. And the fact that people independently describe them as metallic, horn-like, or industrial before ever seeing another video makes it harder to dismiss as pure imagination. There's probably no single cause. Some are hoaxes, some are mundane physics doing spooky things, and some might be rare atmospheric acoustics we don't have great models for yet. The unsettling part is that the sky is a giant resonant space, and we don't monitor it acoustically the way we do visually. So it's likely not aliens or portals or the apocalypse. But it is a reminder that sound can lie to your brain in ways sight usually doesn't, and that nature still has a few tricks that feel deeply wrong when you hear them. Story 9. The bloop earns its reputation. It's one of those things where the explanation is reasonable, but the vibes never fully recover. Back in the late 90s, underwater microphones run by NOAA picked up this insanely loud, ultra-low frequency sound from the southern Pacific. Loud enough that it was detected by sensors thousands of miles apart. At first, it didn't match anything known. Too powerful for whales, too weird for earthquakes, too organic sounding to comfortably file away. So yeah, early on it got floated as possibly biological, which is basically scientific catnip for the internet. Years later, the official explanation shifted to ice. Massive ice quakes. Huge Antarctic ice shelves cracking, grinding, and collapsing, producing sounds that travel absurd distances through water. Plausible. Backed by later recordings that sound similar. Makes sense on paper. But here's why people still side-eye it. The timing, the initial uncertainty, and the sheer scale of the sound. Ice breaking is normal, but this thing was cartoonishly loud and oddly shaped acoustically. Plus, the first it was organic, now its ice progression feels like a classic downgrade from exciting to boring. Is it probably ice? Yeah, almost certainly. Does it still feel unsettling that the ocean can scream that loudly and we only notice because we accidentally had a microphone there? Also, yes. The ocean doesn't need monsters to be creepy. It's already doing plenty all by itself. Story 10, there are a few broadcasts like that floating around in recordings and compilations, and they all hit the same nerve. Repetitive tones, bells, dings, beeps, followed by a calm, detached female voice reading names or identifiers. No emotion, no explanation, just a list. It sounds like an obituary, but stripped of context or compassion, which somehow makes it way worse. What really gets under your skin is that it doesn't sound performative. It doesn't sound like a horror production or a prank. It sounds administrative, like it was meant for someone specific, somewhere, and you just happened to overhear it by accident. That's the same reason number stations are creepy. You're listening to something real, purposeful, and absolutely not meant for you. The bells feel like markers. The voice feels like a ledger being read aloud. And once your brain makes the leap to, these might be dead people, it's hard to unhear it that way. Even if there's a mundane explanation hiding underneath, it's probably not supernatural. It's probably espionage, military comms, data transmission, or some very dry bureaucratic process leaking into the open airwaves. But horror doesn't require ghosts. Sometimes all it takes is a calm voice, a list of names, and the feeling that you're listening to something you were never supposed to hear. Story 11, Ball Lightning. Ball lightning is an unexplained atmospheric electrical phenomenon. The term refers to reports of luminous, spherical objects which vary from pea size to several meters in diameter. Though usually associated with thunderstorms, it lasts considerably longer than the split-second flash of a lightning bolt. Many early reports say that the ball eventually explodes, sometimes with fatal consequences, leaving behind the odor of sulfur. Holy crap, I read about someone who's seen one. They're extremely rare. He described it as something almost religious. I can understand him, but it comes to show that we don't understand everything, and that we should just accept the fact that there's things that can happen that are 100% natural, but maybe very, very rare, and we can't explain it in more detail than that. We can't study it. Some people were studying the phenomenon and started to lean to the conclusion that it is a plasma suspended in a high-power EM radiation field. They were thinking this because the ball lightning had been reported to be crackling and have shape but would pass through solid objects, and apparently, I'm no physicist, a plasma suspended that way would pass through objects. Story 12. Every single day, every human on Earth has to lose consciousness for hours, not resting. Not power-saving mode, full-on shutdown of awareness, and if you don't do it, things fall apart fast. You don't just get tired, you lose touch with reality. Hallucinations, paranoia, cognitive collapse. Keep going and your body eventually just quits. What's wild is how little we actually understand why this is mandatory. We know what happens during sleep: memory consolidation, waste clearance, hormone regulation, neural recalibration. But none of that fully explains why consciousness itself has to go offline. Why can't the brain do maintenance while we're awake? Why does awareness have to disappear entirely? Sleep deprivation doesn't just impair thinking. It breaks the mind in a very specific way. Reality starts leaking. The boundary between internal and external dissolves, which makes it feel less like rest and more like a required reboot to keep consciousness from destabilizing. And the scariest part? We don't control it. You can delay it, but eventually the brain will take it from you. Microsleeps, blackouts, forced unconsciousness. The system will shut you down. So yeah, every night humanity collectively vanishes for a while. We come back mostly the same, sometimes a little different. We don't really know why consciousness needs this ritual to survive. Story 13. The nightmare does a brutal job of showing why. On paper, it's simple. Your brain wakes up before your body does. The paralysis that normally keeps you from acting out dreams doesn't shut off in time, and the dream imagery leaks into waking consciousness. Very tidy explanation. Very useless at 3 a.m. when it's happening to you. What makes it uniquely horrifying is how consistent the experiences are across cultures and people who've never talked to each other. The presence, the pressure on the chest, the sense of being watched, figures at the edge of the room, shadow people, demons, aliens, old hags. Pick your flavor, but the structure of the fear is almost identical. Your brain manufactures the most threatening narrative it can with total confidence. And yeah, if you already have a fear of aliens, that movie is basically psychological warfare. Sleep paralysis doesn't politely tailor hallucinations to what you're comfortable with. It digs through your subconscious and pulls out whatever scares you most, then stages it inches from your face while you're completely unable to move. The worst part is how real it feels. Not dreamlike, not fuzzy, hyper-real. You're awake. You know you're awake. That's what breaks people. It's not supernatural, but it's proof that your own brain is fully capable of creating an experience that feels indistinguishable from one, which is not comforting when you're trying to fall asleep afterward. Story 14. In the early 1800s, the Chase family vault in Chase Vault was opened multiple times for new burials, and every single time the coffins inside were found violently displaced. Heavy lead coffins, some weighing hundreds of pounds, were tossed around the chamber, stacked upright, slammed against walls, while the vault itself showed no signs of forced entry. The stone door seal was intact. The floor was undisturbed. Nothing was broken except the arrangement of the dead. At first, people blamed vandals, then earthquakes, then flooding. But none of those explanations really fit cleanly. No water damage, no cracks, no reports of seismic activity that would selectively rearrange coffins without leaving other evidence. And the vault was resealed repeatedly under supervision, only for the same thing to happen again. Eventually, after enough public unease, the coffins were removed entirely and the vault was left empty. The phenomenon stopped because there was nothing left to move. Case closed, sort of. What makes it unsettling isn't that it must be supernatural. It's that no explanation fully accounts for the consistency and specificity of what happened. Heavy objects moved with intent-like chaos in a sealed space multiple times over years. It's one of those rare cases where history shrugs and says, we don't actually know. And honestly, that uncertainty is creepier than any ghost story. Story 15. They show up in stories way too often to feel random. Just a staircase, sometimes concrete, sometimes wood, sometimes half-rotted, sitting in the middle of nowhere with no house, no foundation, no debris around it. Not ruins, not a trail feature, just stairs to absolutely nothing. The rational explanations exist, sure. Old structures that burned down or collapsed. Logging platforms, lookout points, flood damage, stuff like that. And some of them probably are mundane. But the thing that makes people uneasy is how often they don't look old enough, damaged enough, or contextualized enough to make sense. No nails, no rubble, no indication that anything was ever attached. And then there's the pattern in the stories. People report the same instincts. Don't touch it, don't climb it, don't linger. Animals avoid them. Sudden silence. Feeling watched, which is probably your survival brain screaming about unnatural geometry in a place where geometry shouldn't exist. What really seals it is that even people who don't believe in anything paranormal still get the hell out when they see one. You don't need a ghost to make it creepy. It's the wrong object in the wrong place, and your brain hates that. It's probably nothing, but it feels like the kind of nothing you shouldn't mess with. And honestly, trust the vibe. Story 16. The Dark Side of Oz thing hits differently than most just coincidence syncs. You line up The Wizard of Oz with The Dark Side of the Moon, hit play on the MGM Lion's third roar, and suddenly stuff starts matching up way too cleanly. Lyrics comment on what's happening on screen. Musical swells line up with scene changes. Emotional beats land at suspiciously perfect moments. It doesn't just sync once or twice. It keeps doing it across the whole movie. And yeah, people are right that humans are pattern-finding machines. If you try hard enough, you can sync almost anything to almost anything. But this one feels stickier. The vibes match. The themes match. Madness, home, authority, illusion, time, fear. Dorothy and Floyd weirdly agree on a lot. What makes it extra peculiar is that Pink Floyd has always refused to confirm or deny anything. No wink, no lol, no, just silence. Which is either because it's nonsense, or because acknowledging it would kill the fun, or because it genuinely wasn't intentional, but they realized after the fact that it worked too well to mess with. It's probably a coincidence, but it's the kind of coincidence that feels like reality briefly lining up its beats with yours. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Story 17. The newer weather-based ideas actually make it more interesting, not less. These so-called air bombs, or microbursts, are basically massive columns of cold air dropping out of storm clouds and slamming into the ocean. When they hit, they spread out violently, generating freak waves and brutal wind shear. If you're a ship or a low-flying plane and you get caught in one, there may be no time to react, no mayday, no debris field that makes sense afterward. And the triangle is a perfect storm zone. Warm currents, volatile weather, sudden storms, heavy traffic, shallow areas next to deep ocean. and some funky magnetic quirks that don't help navigation. It's not one spooky thing, it's a pileup of bad conditions that overlap in an unlucky patch of ocean. But even knowing that, it still feels eerie. Disappearances without distress calls. Planes that just don't arrive. Ships that vanish without wreckage. The explanations are plausible, but they're not comforting. What keeps it fascinating is that it's not supernatural enough to dismiss and not mundane enough to fully relax about. It's just nature being perfectly capable of deleting you without drama. No monsters, no portals. Just the ocean reminding us it doesn't need permission to be lethal. Story 18. The vile vortices idea came from noticing that a weird number of disappearances, wrecks, magnetic oddities, and this place feels bad reports seem to cluster in specific regions around the globe. Bermuda Triangle, Devil's Sea, parts of the South Atlantic, stretches of the Indian Ocean. The theory itself is loose and very 20th century, but the creepy part is that a lot of these locations do overlap with extreme geology, volatile weather, magnetic quirks, or deep ocean trenches. Even if the term is dramatic, the pattern makes you wonder if Earth has stress points we barely understand. And then there's the sound distortion spot you're talking about. Places like the center of the universe or similar acoustic dead zones elsewhere. You stand on a marked point and suddenly your own voice booms back at you, while people just a few feet away barely hear you. Or worse, you can't hear them at all. It feels isolating in a way that's hard to explain, like stepping into a pocket where reality has slightly different rules. None of this requires anything supernatural. It's geometry, materials, waves, physics, doing something unintuitive. But the human brain hates that. We expect continuity. We expect shared experience. When sound, one of our most basic reality checks, stops behaving normally, it sets off alarm bells. It's not that these places are dangerous, it's that they quietly remind you the world isn't obligated to make intuitive sense to you. Story 19. The Yonaguni Monument is one of those discoveries that feels like it slipped through the cracks of history. Divers stumble on it in the 80s and suddenly there's this massive geometric structure sitting off the coast of Japan. Flat terraces, sharp angles, bear-like formations, straight edges that look way too intentional to be comfortably dismissed. It doesn't look like a random pile of rocks. It looks like something that was designed. And that's where it gets uncomfortable, because unless someone was out there with scuba gear and stone tools, this thing had to be carved when it wasn't underwater. Sea levels were much lower around 10,000 years ago, which means this structure could predate what we're supposed to believe about large-scale human construction. Back when humans were allegedly just figuring out farming and basic settlements, not carving giant complexes into bedrock, the official explanations waffle between it's natural and maybe humans modified a natural formation, which is doing a lot of work without really settling anything. The cuts are straight, the scale is huge, and the layout feels purposeful in a way erosion usually doesn't. What makes Yonaguni fascinating isn't that it proves some lost advanced civilization. It's that it pressures the timeline. Either humans were more capable earlier than we give them credit for, or nature accidentally made something that looks uncannily like architecture. Both options mess with our comfort. It sits down there quietly, not proving anything, not disproving anything, just existing as a question mark carved into stone, reminding us that prehistory might not be as simple or as linear as we like to think. Story 20. There are a lot of solid theories. Atmospheric pressure changes, temperature inversions bending sound, wind moving through buildings or terrain just right, distant industrial noise traveling absurd distances, even ice cracking or tectonic stress making the air vibrate. All of those can produce deep, metallic, horn-like sounds. On paper, it's physics doing weird but allowed things. What keeps it unsettling is that it's still unpredictable and inconsistent. It doesn't happen everywhere the same way. It doesn't follow a schedule. It doesn't always correlate cleanly with weather, cities, or known sources. And the sounds themselves are oddly similar across different countries and environments. People who've never heard of the phenomenon describe it the same way. Metallic, droning, industrial, like the sky itself is groaning. The human brain really hates that. We're fine with thunder because we understand it. We're fine with planes because we can point at them. But when sound seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, with no visible cause, it trips something ancient in us. It's probably not supernatural. It's probably multiple rare phenomena getting lumped together under one creepy name. But until we can reliably predict it or reproduce it on demand, it's going to stay in that uncomfortable category of mostly explained, but not really understood. And honestly, that gray area is where the creepiest stuff lives. Story 21. The Toynbee tiles are creepy in a very specific, low-budget, real-world way that sticks with you. They're these homemade tiles embedded directly into asphalt streets, mostly in US cities, but also popping up internationally, always similar messages. References to resurrection, the planet Jupiter, Kubrick, sometimes vague threats or prophecies. Same wording patterns, same obsession, different cities, for decades. What makes them unsettling isn't that they're flashy. They're not. They're crude, cracked, often half destroyed by traffic. It's the persistence. Someone spent years, maybe their entire adult life, going out at night, cutting holes into active roadways, laying these things down, and disappearing without ever taking credit. No manifesto, no interviews, no clear explanation. There are theories. A single deeply troubled individual, a small group. Someone convinced them they were spreading a vital message. And that almost makes it worse. Because if it's one person, that means one human quietly altered the physical landscape of multiple cities for years without being stopped, noticed, or fully understood. It's not supernatural. It's not a hoax in the usual sense. It's a physical record of obsession, belief, and intent etched into public space. And the fact that we still don't fully know why is what keeps it unsettling. You're literally driving over someone's worldview. Story 22. The double slit experiment is one of those things that never stops being unsettling, no matter how many times it's explained. You shoot particles at a wall with two slits, and they behave like waves, spreading out and interfering with themselves. Fine. Weird, but fine. Then you try to check which slit they go through, and suddenly they stop acting like waves and behave like particles instead. Same setup, same particles, same rules, except now reality changes, because you looked. And the messed up part isn't just observation affects the outcome. It's that the universe seems to care whether the information exists, not whether a human is watching. Even setting up a detector is enough. It's like reality asks, "Do you know?" and then decides how to behave based on the answer. What really fries people's brains is that nothing about the particle itself changes. No force hits it. No shove. No obvious interaction. Just the possibility of knowing alters the result. That's not intuitive physics. That's existential horror wrapped in math. Every explanation works mathematically and feels awful conceptually. Waves, particles, probabilities, pick your poison, none of them make it feel normal. The double slit experiment doesn't say reality is weird sometimes. It says reality was always weird, and we only notice when we poke it the wrong way. Story 23. People massively underestimate how big and how unfinished the ocean is. We've explored, in any meaningful sense, maybe 10% of it. And that's being generous. Most of what we call explored is sonar passes and blurry maps, not actual eyes on, we know what's there. Exploration, huge areas have never been seen directly by humans or robots. They're just dark, cold guesses. Everyone knows about the Mariana Trench, but even that kind of messes with perspective. It's the deepest place we know about, not necessarily the deepest place that exists. The ocean floor is fractured, folded, subducted, and constantly changing. There are trenches, pits, and structures we haven't properly mapped yet, let alone visited. It wouldn't be shocking at all to find something deeper, just harder to detect. What gets me is that the ocean covers most of the planet, controls climate, produces a massive chunk of our oxygen, and hosts ecosystems that don't rely on sunlight at all. And we still treat it like background scenery. Space feels mysterious because it's empty. The ocean is mysterious because it's full and inaccessible. Story 24. You've got a normal river, the Brule, flowing along just fine, and then it hits the falls and splits. One side continues downstream like a well-behaved river. The other side drops straight into a hole in the rock and just disappears. No visible outlet, no obvious turbulence downstream, nothing. People have tried everything to track it. Dye, ping pong balls, logs, GPS trackers, ash, foam. Most of it never shows up anywhere identifiable. Occasionally something might appear far downstream, but never consistently enough to say, aha, mystery solved. It's maddeningly inconclusive. The official explanation is that the water drains into cracks in the basalt and rejoins the river underground or feeds into groundwater systems, which is reasonable. Basalt is basically Swiss cheese at the right scale, but the plumbing is so complex and hidden that no one's been able to map it cleanly. So the answer is basically, it probably goes somewhere, trust us. And that's why it sticks in people's heads. A river just casually vanishing in broad daylight feels wrong, even if geology says it's allowed. It's not supernatural, it's just nature doing something that looks like a glitch. Half a river goes on a journey we can't follow, and we have to be okay with not knowing where it ends. Story 25. It's a forest near Cluj-Napoca that people call the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania, and not just because it sounds cool. Locals have avoided it for generations. People report losing time, electronics dying, nausea, anxiety spikes, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Animals supposedly won't go in. Even experienced hikers say the vibe is just wrong. Then there's the clearing, a perfectly circular patch where nothing grows. No trees, no grass, no obvious explanation. Oil tests don't really clear it up. It just sits there like the forest forgot how to forest. What really messes with people are the photos. Strange lights, orbs, shapes that don't show up until after the fact. Again, there are explanations, lens artifacts, dust, long exposures, but when the same kinds of images keep popping up over decades, people start squinting harder. The most unsettling thing is that even skeptics come out uncomfortable, not convinced of anything supernatural, just unsettled. Headaches, dizziness, disorientation, the kind of reaction you don't expect from trees and dirt. It's probably geology, infrasound, electromagnetic quirks, psychology, or some cocktail of all of the above. But whatever it is, the forest doesn't feel neutral, and places that don't feel neutral tend to linger in your head long after you leave. Story 26. What people usually mean is the red rain that fell over Kerala in the early 2000s. It literally stained clothes, buildings, and streets blood red. Locals thought it was biblical. It kept happening on and off for weeks, not just once, which already made it feel off. When samples were examined, scientists found microscopic red particles suspended in the rainwater. At first, the safe explanation was spores or algae carried into the atmosphere and dumped by rain. Sensible, boring, except some tests claimed the particles didn't behave quite like known organisms. There were reports that they contained something resembling DNA but not matching anything cataloged, and that they could survive extreme conditions that would normally destroy biological material. That's where it crossed from weird weather into, okay, hold on. Mainstream science eventually leaned hard toward terrestrial explanations, but not everything lined up cleanly. And the idea of unknown biological material literally falling from the sky stuck around for a reason. Even if it was algae, it highlighted how little we monitor what's actually floating above us all the time. The unsettling part isn't aliens or cosmic spores. It's realizing the atmosphere is a global conveyor belt full of things we barely sample, rarely test, and usually only notice when they turn the rain red. Sometimes the sky just drops a question mark on you. Story 27. You've got people found burned almost completely to ash, but the room around them is barely touched. Furniture intact. Curtains fine. Sometimes just a scorch mark on the floor and a pile of remains. No sign of accelerants. No evidence of a normal house fire. And in a lot of cases, no clear ignition source anyone can point to with confidence. The explanations always feel strained. A cigarette plus body fat equals a candle. Okay, maybe in theory, but then why doesn't the fire spread like fire normally does? Why are extremities sometimes untouched? Why does it seem to burn inward instead of outward? And why does it happen so rarely with no consistent pattern that it never becomes predictable? What makes it stick is that these aren't ancient myths or medieval stories. A lot of cases are modern, documented, investigated, photographed, coroners, police, fire investigators, looking at something and basically saying, we don't know how this happened. Is it a misunderstood mechanism? Probably. Some edge case interaction between heat, chemistry, physiology, and environment that almost never lines up just right. But almost never isn't never, and that's the problem. It's not that people are randomly bursting into flames every day, it's that occasionally, a human body seems to burn in a way that doesn't obey our expectations of fire. And whenever that happens, the explanations sound less like answers and more like, please stop asking about this. Story 28. For years, stuff in this small Sicilian town just started catching fire. Not houses burning down in a normal way, random objects, TVs, fridges, mattresses, electrical cables that weren't even plugged in, sometimes multiple fires at once, sometimes after power was completely cut to the area. Firefighters would put one out, turn around, and another would start behind them. Authorities tried everything: faulty wiring, gas leaks, arson, mass hysteria. They evacuated residents, brought in experts, monitored the town, and still couldn't pin it down cleanly. At one point, officials straight up admitted the fires might be caused by electromagnetic emissions, which is an explanation that somehow answers nothing while raising about 10 new questions. That's where the military testing theory starts to feel uncomfortably plausible. Sicily has a long history of military installations, radar systems, and classified activity. If you were testing some kind of directed energy system, electronic warfare tech, or high-powered EM equipment, a remote coastal town would be a pretty convenient place to accidentally cook appliances without telling anyone why. What makes Canneto creepy isn't that it screams conspiracy. It's that the events were real, repeated, documented, and disruptive, and the explanations kept changing until everyone quietly stopped talking about it. Nothing ever definitively proved what caused the fires. They just stopped. And whenever something weird happens for years and then abruptly goes quiet, people tend to assume the testing phase ended. Story 29. People have been seeing them in the Australian outback for well over a century. Floating lights that appear at night. usually far from towns. They hover, drift, split, change color, and this is the part that really gets people, sometimes follow you. Not aggressively, just patiently, keeping distance. Matching speed, like they're curious. Ask locals and you'll get very calm warnings. Don't chase them. Don't approach them. Don't trust your sense of distance. People have walked toward them thinking they're close, only to realize hours later they're completely lost. Some report the lights retreating when approached. Others say they advance. A few stories end with people barely making it back alive. The scientific explanations are reasonable but unsatisfying. Atmospheric refraction. Temperature inversions bending distant light sources. Car headlights from hundreds of kilometers away curving over the horizon. All totally possible. But those explanations don't fully account for the movement patterns, the apparent intelligence, or the consistency of descriptions from people decades apart who never spoke to each other. What really sells the creep factor is the setting. The outback is vast, flat, silent, and deadly if you misjudge it. Anything that messes with depth perception out there is not just spooky. It's dangerous. No aliens. No ghosts. Probably. Just lights that appear where nothing should be, move in ways light shouldn't, and have been quietly leading humans astray since long before cameras were common. And that's somehow worse than a monster. Story 30, Taos hum. A small percentage of people in and around Taos hear a constant low-frequency hum, not ringing like tinnitus. Not mechanical exactly, more like a distant diesel engine that never turns off. It's usually louder at night, audible indoors, and seems to come from everywhere at once. Step outside to find it, nothing. Drive toward it, still there. What makes it unsettling is that most people hear absolutely nothing. No recordings ever capture it reliably. Sensitive microphones, surveys, investigations, all inconclusive. The hum exists only for the people who hear it. And for some of them, it's relentless. Sleep disruption, headaches, anxiety. People move away because of it. Explanations range from industrial noise and underground infrastructure to infrasound, seismic activity, or even quirks of human hearing interacting with the environment. All plausible, none fully satisfying, especially since similar hums pop up in totally different parts of the world with no obvious shared cause. The creepiest part isn't the sound itself, it's that reality seems to fork. Some people living in a world with constant, invisible noise, others in silence, and neither side can fully prove the other wrong. No monster, no lights in the sky, just the feeling that something is happening and only some brains are tuned to notice it.